What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of BV Nutrition. God, Jesus, that was an older episode of what used to be called BV Nutrition. Now it's called the Nutrition Blueprint Podcast. I guess I did that for 4 years, so still a normal thing. Kenzie, what's going on? How are you?
I'm good. I guess it's just autopilot, the
Yeah.
Proven Nutrition Radio.
It just happens. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just like not thinking about it, not even wearing my flannel shirt, shirt and everything. So I guess it happens. But yeah, what's new in your life? I guess like the word on the street from you is that you're moving to Toronto this
Yeah.
weekend. Is it
Yep.
today?
Tomorrow I'm moving. So today is my last day to get everything packed up, and it's pretty exciting. My roommate moved in, sent me some pictures of our new place, and it looks very nice. I'm
Is it close
super
to campus?
excited. Not really. It's a bit of a bus trip, but the campus is right downtown. And so it's kind of nicer to be a little bit further away in a more of a residential area.
Nice.
Good for, there's some trails nearby, which will be really nice for walking on.
How big is Toronto? Like, is it like a massive city or just like, I don't even know how many people it's in there.
I'm actually not sure either. It's pretty big though. Like it is a pretty big city, but I should probably know more about the city that I'm moving to.
That's awesome. I think we brought in a guest in the podcast. His name is, and would you recommend it? I think Andy, he's addicted to kale. I don't, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
He's
Andy
Canadian.
DeSantis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Andy DeSantis. Yeah. I think he lives in Toronto, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. He's great on Instagram.
Really funny dude. Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, a big new chapter for you. So it should be an exciting time. What are we talking about today?
So today, a couple days ago, we put out a post on Instagram that was asking people to tell us what their biggest struggles were in nutrition. So then you had people leave comments below and share those struggles. And then you also put up a little question box on stories, and people responded to that story with their struggles. So we took those struggles, and now we're going to be talking about that. You're going to be giving them some coaching through these struggles.
Yeah, it's funny that because this is exactly, for people listening, this is exactly what we do in our group coaching calls in our program, which is a good way to really be able to help people in a group setting, mostly because a lot of times like people don't understand what their struggles are. I don't know if you listening to this, it may be something that you deal with, but sometimes you don't realize that you have a problem until somebody brings it up to you. Or like, oh yeah, you shouldn't, or you should be doing this, or you shouldn't be doing this. Like, wait, what? So I'm not supposed to be doing it this way. So sometimes there's like this like massive amount of lack of awareness, I guess, around really what's like the issue at hand sometimes that we typically tend to kind of experience. But yeah, so it's usually like the way that we really like to kind of coach people. So I guess we're going to do it today here in this podcast episode. So
yeah, and I think the other thing is that a lot of people don't come in with a specific question. If you said, ask me a question as a dietitian, they're not really sure exactly what the right question to ask is to get the answer that they're looking for, to get the solution to that problem. But when you ask about a struggle, everyone can identify a struggle in their lives. And from there, that's what a coach does, is pulling out what's the coachable moment in that struggle, as you often say.
Yeah, I remember I was like, oh, it's like a Q&A with the dietitian, and there would be crickets. I was like, sometimes there's questions, right? But sometimes they're just like very shallow questions, like, oh, what is a carb, or are carbs bad for me? Those kind of things like that. But it's kind of like answers that people already know the answers to in a way. But they just want the validation to, but versus obviously a struggle is something that kind of goes deeper. But a lot of times like people are either afraid or just not really wanting to share what those struggles are going to be. So I think a lot of times like people saw that post that we had and they kind of held off because they just didn't really want to share. And it's a common thing that happens in this, like, in this area of like, health, fitness, nutrition, body image, all those different things. So it's common. So if you're listening to this, make sure you shoot us a message and let us know really what the biggest struggle is, so we can kind of find maybe ways in we can support you, maybe create some content around really what the biggest issue for you is, or the biggest pain points for you are going to be. So where do we start?
So one of the biggest things that we saw with those responses was specific foods or types of foods that people are seeing that those are the things that are preventing them from losing fat or improving their nutrition. So we got chicken quesadillas as an answer to what
That
is your
is
biggest nutrition struggle, which that
that's
one
the
was a good
struggle.
one. Also, when I see dessert, my addiction to potato chips. So it's these specific foods that are the detriment to our some of the listeners and followers.
Yeah. And we can break it down into a couple of things here. We'll talk about the addiction to food and food addiction. That's the thing. It's not just like, I really love potato chips and I want to eat them all the time, but rather there is such a thing as a food addiction, or just simply like, I guess the way we can explain it today is like the way that you eat certain kinds of foods and how you pick them, and the types of foods that you buy, that they're just engineered and designed to make you addicted to them. And we can kind of break it down into that. But let's just first start to kind of like eliminate the line that separates good versus bad here, because I think that's the biggest problem that exists. Like, people see a chicken quesadilla as a bad food. People see a dessert as a bad food. People see potato chips as a bad food, right? So they typically try to put them into the thing in the side of food choices that do not fit into what's healthy or what's, for weight loss, or what's going to help me accomplish my goals. And the reality is that because of uh, those restrictions, or that line that they draw, between the good and the bad, that's why this becomes struggles, because they see it as prohibited. So the more that something you prohibit yourself from something, the more you want it. It's kind of like, it's like, you can't have what is it that they say, like,
You always want
yo,
what you can't have.
you always
Yeah.
want what you can have, right? So it's always a thing, and when you have it, it's which is usually the opposite. Like, I think for the longest time, I think when I was growing up, I wanted to have like an Xbox. um all my friends had it. My parents were like, no, we're not going to get you an Xbox, it's too expensive, blah blah. And I was like, oh my god, I want it so bad, whatever. So anyways, like 6 months later, I ended up getting the Xbox. I saved the money. I was like obsessed with it for like a month, and then afterwards, I didn't barely even touched it, right? Because I'm not huge into video games. And a lot of times it happens the same thing when I see this into my clients. The less restrictions you create around this, and the more that you learn that you can include these foods in a way that it's moderate and that you can still enjoy them, the less that you actually recur to those foods as a way to either calm yourself down or to calm your emotions, because usually that's the biggest association that exists between those foods that you typically kind of have. So for this chicken quesadilla person, perhaps it's like you only have chicken quesadillas when it's like a reward thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to treat myself tonight with chicken quesadillas, or I'm going to reward myself today with dessert. When in reality is, well, like, how can I have dessert every day? Is there a way that I can have alternatives, or ways in which I can incorporate a cookie every day? An Oreo. I had a client that had an addiction with Oreos, and I was like, you can have a couple of Oreos, and you can have them every day if you wanted to, and you can still be okay. And then the moment that she started like switching that, and the moment that people start to switch that cassette in their brain to saying like, this is like a special occasion food, I can only have this X amount of times or whatnot, usually they stop to become so obsessive about them. And I think that's a common thing. Now, granted, of course, eating like a cheesecake like of the size of like a typical restaurant size every single day, you may be able to make it fit depending on who you are, but it may not be conducive to your goals. So you also have to define what your goals are, and then what's the trade-off that you're going to be willing to be able to have in order for you to be able to achieve that specific goal, right? And sometimes some things like that may not fully fit, at least daily, in order for you to be able to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah, I think the other thing with that is, one, it's not really supportive of your goals likely to eat an entire cheesecake, but also you'd probably feel pretty terrible if you're eating an entire cheesecake every day. So I think another big part of it is tuning into how your body actually feels when you're having certain foods, rather than just having them to soothe those emotions. And I like making that shift, like I'm going to make certain choices to take care of my body, rather than I'm just going to eat all this food
Mm-hmm.
just because, because I'm feeling a negative emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very common thing. And I think it's a food relationship too. It's a food relationship issue too, which is again, like it's that good and bad mentality, which I think it's like the bigger thing. Now when it comes down to addiction, that's an entire different, even not different topic, but it's more about understanding what world do we live in today, particularly what um, uh, world in terms of the food industry we live in today, because we have ever since, like, the industrial revolution, years and years and years and years ago, when food actually started to become processed, and things were actually went from just like actual full wholesome, like, fruits, vegetables and things like that, to now actually having methods in order for them to be able to process things and turn them into different versions of them, more palatable versions of them. Then usually what's happened, it's now there's like, over the years, there's been a boom in the amount of like food products. And I think now we're in just that really, like, that time in which, like, there's so much stuff out there, right? There's just so many products that are created. Anybody can create any kind of other products, and usually the food industry focuses on sales, right? They just want to make sure that when you go to the grocery store, you pick up their stuff, because it's such a competitive market, right? I mean, how many brands of peanut butter out there? How many brands of potato chips out there? Like, there's so much stuff in there, so they compete for your attention, because and then the way that they compete for their attention is the way that they present their packaging, and the way that certain things typically taste, even the healthier ones, because healthy eating and the whole healthy products and healthy processed foods that you typically see in a supermarket, they're still competing with a bunch of other thousands of other brands as well, just so they can actually get you to pick them, so you can eat them and enjoy them in that process. So in when a company tries to create something like that, they have to make products, and they have to change the texture. And I used to work in, like, with and I want to bring in one of my mentors, Juan Gonzalez. He's a food scientist, and he talked a lot about the way that food tastes and feels in your mouth. So typically the food industry focuses on that, and there's like an entire departments in these food companies, just so they can understand how food makes you feel, how food actually, like, what kind of like areas of your brain get lit up every time that you eat them, right? There's a big difference between eating like an ear of corn and eating corn chips. You feel different when you eat them. You may love corn, but you absolutely loved corn chips, like that person with the potato chips. I mean, you may love mashed potatoes, you may love maybe like some potatoes, but there's no difference or no comparison when you actually saying, like, I love potato chips. They're coming from the same exact, place. It's usually the way that it is presented to you. So one of the bigger kind of issues that happens in the food industry right now, when people become addicted to food, it's mostly because of that. Most of these foods are typically very easy to overeat. So for example, if you take like an apple, it's, you have to, obviously sometimes you have to cut it, all those different things like that. Now a lot of times when you grab, like, let's say for example, a bag of chips, it's usually to open and just eat, very portable, very easy. It doesn't go bad, because most of the times, like, usually those are pretty shelf stable stuff, so it's a lot more easier to overeat. The second part too, it's like the sizes in which things are being sold. I mean, when is the last time that you grab a bag of chips and you had only one serving? Like, it's
Never,
very
never.
like, never, right? Like, that's the thing, never. Like, and you don't even know what a serving is. It tells you like 16 chips. Are you like the cycle that is like counting all the chips? Like, I've done that before, so I've been that cycle. But no, you don't do that. So you typically have sometimes two, three, four times, and sometimes you have the entire bag, right? And there's obviously the part of the lack of education of people thinking that really what's on the label behind the package is exactly what's in the entire bag. And a lot of times that's only one portion out of like the 16 portions that it's inside of a bag. So I think that's a big kind of like thing that happens with that. And the other part too, that it's in interesting, and I think I talked about this in like in a live that I did on Facebook. It's really, what are the characteristics that makes like certain foods so, what we call hyper-palatable. Hyper-palatable, it's something that just, it tastes so good that you want to have more and more and more of it. And there's specific things that make it that way. Number one, typically foods that are hyper-palatable are very calorie dense, and usually because they use two key ingredients for that: sugar, fat, or the combination of both. I mean, when you think about, for example, a brownie is flour, it's sugar, and it's butter, right? So there's like the main kind of ingredients. That's like the perfect combo for something that tastes incredible. Number two, which is obviously the what I just said, it's intensely flavored. Like, I mean, let's say, for example, you eat a piece of very like 100% dark chocolate. Have you ever had a piece of dark
Yeah,
100% dark chocolate?
100%. Yeah, I have.
What does it taste like?
You don't want to have any more. You have a bite and I actually kind of like it. Like it's an interesting flavor, but then I'm like, I'm good. I don't really need any more chocolate now.
Correct, right? But most people are just like, it's a bitter taste,
Mhm.
right? But when you start to add, sugar and fat into the mix, so you start to add like, either butter or whatever is kind of like the case, right? Then that chocolate starts to become much better. So it goes from 100% to now like you have 20% chocolate and the rest of it is like sugar and fat, right? So that increases the intensity of the flavor. And then when you compare yourself with maybe having like a piece of white chocolate, I mean, it's like this massive like experience that you kind of get every single time that you eat it, right? So that's the second piece. Number three, which goes in line with the intense flavor, it's like immediately delicious. It's like a love at first bite, which is exactly what I just kind of said, right? Number four is that it usually melts down pretty easily. Like it usually kind of dissolves in your mouth, right? If you eat an apple and you leave it in your mouth, what's going to happen to that apple? It'll stay, it'll stay there. Be like, "Oh, I need to take this out of my mouth," right? But if you, for example, a chip and you chew one chip, and within probably like a minute or so, the chip is going to be so dissolved that you're just going to have no choice but just simply to swallow it, right?
Mhm.
The same thing with a piece of chocolate. Like it's either going to melt in your mouth or it's going to dissolve in your mouth, right? So that's another kind of characteristic of something that is hypopalatable. So next time that you eat something processed, ask yourself, like, if I leave this in my mouth right now, is it going to dissolve or is it going to melt to a point I'm gonna have to just kind of have to just what's it called swallow it, or is it gonna be just staying in my mouth and definitely I'm gonna have to either take it out of my mouth or I'm gonna have to chew it to be able to actually like swallow it down. So that's a very interesting way to be able to kind of look at that. And then number five, it's like it's very easy to eat, right? It's like it's things that doesn't really require a lot of chewing because it goes in line with what I just mentioned in terms of obviously melting down pretty easily. So that's those are big things and why people become so addicted to food, because it's just so easy to create like this explosion of flavors and this like perfect combination of intensity and those things too, that it just creates such a wonderful, memorable experience that people crave it, right? Like that's the main reality that exists behind that, and that's exactly how food cravings and food addictions typically start.
Yeah, and if you're struggling with that, like you're not alone. Like you're wired to want those kinds of foods. Like even on an evolutionary basis, like those are
Absolutely.
the kinds of the high calorie foods, the high fat foods, the sugary foods. Those were the foods that our ancestors were trying to get their hands on so that they could survive. So
Yeah.
it's not just you like, oh, like I'm the only person who can't stop eating potato chips. What's wrong with me? Is no, like this is the way we're built and our food has been engineered to make us eat more.
Yeah, so no, you're not broken because you're like you're addicted to foods. I mean, I have a thing for pizza, I have a thing for chocolate. I have the same kinds of like, quote unquote addictions. I just know exactly what they are and I know exactly like, what they could do if I just let myself go around them pretty much. So, and that's a very common thing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that ties into that that you can manage is the emotional piece, and that was the other struggle that came up a lot was emotional eating in times of stress. If you're sad, even if you're happy, turning towards food to manage emotions. So maybe that's something we can get into next, and how to deal with emotional eating, because I think that's something a lot of people
Yeah.
struggle with.
So, and it's all connected in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. So, whenever you combine, I always kind of explain it this way: a physiological need. Let's just kind of talk about what physiology is. Physiology is just the functioning of your body. It's like the process of, or the study of the functioning of, human systems or just the systems of any living thing, right? So your physiology is an ever-changing thing in your body. Like your body's always doing something. It's metabolizing food. It's like trying to make sure that your heart is beating. It's making sure that you're when you're drinking things and whatever, it's like kind of processing that so you can excrete whatever you have to through your urine. You have to process all your food through the liver. Like you have to be able to make your muscles function and all that. Those are all things that require an extreme amount of energy. It's an extreme amount of calories that are required for that to happen. So that's a physiological need. And that's a caloric need that your body requires. So a lot of times, like typically emotional eating happens, not necessarily, yes, it definitely is related to emotions, but a lot of times start to happen because of the restriction that we're creating. And sometimes it's just a physiological need that is paired up with an emotional response. What that means is your body's asking you for something. That's a scenario number one here, right? But then you typically tend to connect it to an emotion. What is something that makes you happy right now? And I always like tell this to my clients, and I joke around with it. I was like, when is the last time that you craved and had a wonderful, incredible experience when you ate a piece of broccoli, when you ate some Brussels sprouts, right? It especially, and some people surprisingly will say like, oh, I actually love them. It makes me feel so happy, but it's not very common. But when I asked the question, when was the last time you had a wonderful, incredible experience that you remember it, when you had a piece of chocolate, when you had, a cookie, when you had a brownie, when you had the potato chips that you're a salty kind of eater, right? They're like, oh, just yesterday, right? So there's that emotional connection because food is a very cultural thing. It's a very emotional thing because of how it makes us feel, right? So that's a big kind of area. I mean, we get stimulated by different kinds of things, with between men and women, or whoever. Obviously there's like, sexual relations. Obviously there's a stimulation around that. With food is sort of in a way sort of the same thing, right? So the big thing that happens with emotions is that a lot of times, like, we let that be a trigger for us to use food as a way to dull a sense. It's usually kind of like the case. So if we're sad, we typically use food as a way to cover ourselves. It's a way to kind of like dull those senses of sadness, or simply to kind of hide ourselves from the fact, right? So we typically try to fill that void by just incorporating food, and then we kind of associate that emotional kind of response with it, right? So, but it's all related to, like, that doesn't start just out of the blue. You didn't just start eating ice cream when you were sad just because. There's a reason for that, and usually that reason started when you were little. And that's what's common, because we are hardwired depending on how we grew up. So if you're a person that your parents always gave you ice cream as a reward, or gave you ice cream when you were sad, or when you were happy, or these like super highs and lows of emotions, and ice cream was a way to celebrate that, then you take that into your adulthood and you turn it into the same thing. You find moments of highs and lows, but now you don't have mom or dad to be able to give it to you or prohibit it from you, because now you have the freedom. So you can kind of have that all the time. So I currently have a client who struggles with the whole thing with fast food. And we had a really in-depth conversation talking about the fact that when he grew up, they didn't have a whole lot. So eating out to eat in McDonald's and places like that was sort of like a luxury for them, right? Because it didn't have a ton and didn't have a whole lot of money growing up. So it's not necessarily because they said no. Part of it is because the mom wanted to be a little bit healthy, but also didn't really have enough funds or money to be able to do those things for the whole family. So he said, I feel now that I have my own independence, I have my own money, I can go whenever I want. So I feel like there's a part of me that feels that that's going to be taken away from me. So I want to make sure that I take advantage of this right now. So every single person has an emotional root cause to why obviously they eat the way they eat. And that's a big kind of thing that it's important to really unveil and uncover, because once you do that, you start to understand yourself a little bit better, and you realize whether maybe you like I'll give you my example. For example, I wouldn't say like I'm an emotional eater, but there are situations that are rooted in my past in which Like I would find and put myself in situations where I don't control how much I eat. And sometimes I end up in a really bad situation. And that's usually in social settings, mostly because I don't like awkward silences, and I don't like, not be paying attention to something, talking to somebody. I mean, if it gets to a point where I'm just sitting there, just sitting, I start panicking a little bit, right? And the best way to kind of fill that void is by simply either drinking or eating. So I would find myself like grabbing food that even when I just had done finished eating, or for example, sometimes I would just have to make sure that I would like drink alcohol way too much, right? Because I would drink something and then I would try to get another one because I wanted to have something in my hand to try to again fill that void. So in a way, that is an emotional eating response, right? Because I've always grew up in a situation in which I never liked being in an awkward silence or that position where like nothing was done. It was kind of hard for me to be on my own with my own thoughts. And that's a bigger problem that exists for many people. They're too afraid. And I learned this from one of my friend, Carol, who she is a spiritual kind of like guru. And she now is like does a bunch of retreats. And she talked about this. We as humans, a lot of times are afraid of being alone with our own thoughts. And because of that, we try to find food as a way to be able to kind of quiet that mind of ours, so we can kind of like find some relief around that. The problem with that is that food is energy, and that energy gets stored. And whenever we don't have enough energy coming out in the way of burning calories, that energy gets stored, and usually that leads to the bigger problems. That is obviously weight gain, and that's what a lot of people typically have right now.
And I think another unfortunate problem is that you can't selectively numb the emotions. Like if you're going to eat food and to try and feel better when you're sad, you're numbing all the emotions. So you're just going through life. It's hard to, if you're eating when you're happy and eating when you're sad, it's just you're living this life where you don't have the kind of positive emotions that you want either, because it's just sort of this, you're just trying to keep that even playing field by keep being constantly
Yeah.
just numb kind of.
Yeah, it's difficult. And I think the best way, I guess, like to overcome some of the
Mhm.
struggles, and as a way to sort of think about, okay, what can I do, is one is identify them, right? Try to and we did an exercise and a practice that I learned from the people over at Precision Nutrition, and they call it the notice and name exercise, which is noticing what you experience and what you feel, and then name that moment, right? So if I am let's say for people that are emotional eaters as a result of stress, and you're a person that you just got out of a meet out of, you just got off of a meeting, that, or you're about to have a meeting that it's you're going to have to present something. I think one of my clients had that recently. And then you're super, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of nervousness and stuff like that, and you find yourself going to the kitchen right before that, and then you're just like kind of like eating things, and like having like 3 cups of coffee and then stuff like that. Catch yourself in that moment, because now you understand, okay, what's happening is panicking, anxiety, stress, right? So you're noticing that and you name it, and it could be like you can kind of name it whatever it is. And in that moment could be like I don't know, work stress, whatever that could be, obviously the name that you kind of give it to. So when you notice and you name it, then obviously what you can do differently in that moment. So every single habit, we talked about this in the past, is built up into a trigger, a response, or a routine that you do, and usually a reward. So the trigger is usually going to be like a situation that causes work stress. That's the name that you gave it to. So if that's the trigger, then you need to figure it out. Okay, so my typical routine is I typically go to the kitchen and just go to town. You have to do a few different things. One, you change the routine or you modify the routine. So if you change the routine, is like instead of going to the kitchen, you go and take a walk before you go. Okay, so that's a good way to be able to kind of like clear your head, and you come back without any extra calories added, and you come back more refreshed. The second thing is actually modifying the environment. So, or modifying the routine. So instead of going and having a pantry filled up with sweets and all the different super hyper palatable foods, then you have this massive like big thing of fruit, or like a fruit bowl or something like that in the kitchen, and that's exactly what you choose to have. You're going to fill yourself a little bit more up a little bit quicker, and that's going to be an easier way to be able to kind of respond to that, right? So noticing a name, identifying those triggers, and then changing or changing the routine or modifying the current ones that you have. That's a really good way to be able to kind of like do that. And also at the same time, if it happens, then really reflecting back on if you found yourself and you lost yourself in a jar of peanut butter or like a bag of cookies or an Oreo bag, whatever it is the case, then you're probably going to feel guilty afterwards, right? But then instead of feeling guilty, it's asking yourself, why did this happen? And what can I do differently next time? What can I try differently next time? And that's a really good exercise because your mind is really, there's a lot of stuff happening in your subconscious. And when you talk about this stuff, it's your conscious identifying the subconscious. And that's a crazy mindset stuff because we do so much stuff that is just so automatic and so natural, and that's your subconscious always operating, right? But when you have a conversation and you say like, wait, dude, like let's just like have, like, you're doing a lot of things without my permission, let's just you and I have a conversation. When you do this notice and name exercise and you start to actively change the way that you do certain things, it's you obviously talking to your subconscious and saying like, I'm running this show, not you. That's exactly what needs to happen. And this is obviously what like every single thing, every single mental health issue typically is rooted in that, your subconscious.
And I think that another important point is that not every strategy is going to work for every person. So you might try something, you might try modifying your environment, and
Mhm.
that doesn't work for you to manage your emotional eating. But as you start to reflect and experiment and ask yourself about the why, you can kind of come up with your own emotional eating plan. So something that you do every time when this happens. And I think the notice
Mhm.
and name is the most important thing. Like you need to recognize that it's about to happen, and then from that, then you can create a plan. Like for me, I'm quite a big emotional eater. Like that's something that I've struggled with for a long time, with stress. And so for me, when I recognize that, I spend 1 minute breathing, and then after that, I say, what's the next most loving thing I can do for myself? And 9 times out of 10, that thing is not go and get food. It's take a break, it's read a book, it's go for a walk, but trying to make the kind of choice I'd want to make for my friend if they were in that kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. I remember that's a really good thing that a lot of our clients typically take away from that last time we talked about it. So yeah. So that's the whole thing. Again, it's not easier. It's not easy. It's easier said than done.
Mhm.
Right. But it's all about starting, and it's all about like, noticing those things, at least doing that first.
Yeah. Great. So I think that those are sort of covering a number of questions that people ask. Now we could maybe get into a couple specific struggles that people had. So the first one was weight regain. So someone who has lost some weight and now they're constantly afraid, oh, what if I gain the weight all back? So
Yep.
if someone came up to you with that, what would you say?
Yeah, so it's first understanding exactly what I typically would ask is like, okay, what worked, or what was it that helped you lose the weight in the first place? And then for most people, they'll say like, oh, I did this diet or I did this program. It's a very common 99% of people would usually say that, right? And it's like, okay, so what was effective about that program? Oh, well, I was just super motivated and stuff like that. So I tried to start to understand what the situation and the environment was at the time that they did that. Right. So we understand all the factors. What was your exercise like? What was your eating like? What was your stress like? Your work like, and all those different things like that. And then we start to identify those things. Right. So, and they may realize that, okay, like I was, doing like a juice cleanse and I lost all this weight and all that kind of stuff in like 30 days. And it's like, okay, and then I started asking, okay, so you did it, you lost the weight, and then what happened? You regained it. Okay, how long did it take for that weight to be regained? And what do you think was the big issue for that? Well, I guess I just stopped. And this is the second thing that 99% of people say. I just stopped doing it. Okay. Why did you stop doing it? Oh, it was just like so hard. Like, eventually I just got tired of, and here's like some bullet points for you guys that, I think you're gonna relate to. It was too repetitive. I got tired of eating the same things. I was hungry all the time. I hated my life eating those things. I didn't enjoy what I was eating. Or like I was just trying to make sure that I got to my weight goal. And once I was done, I didn't see a need for me to continue on that. Those are the usual responses in this kind of cases. And usually what I say at that point is like, well, you're just obviously a victim of, what we call chronic dieting or fat dieting, right? It's like you did it as a means to an end. You did the diet to get to a specific plan. But what the problem was, your struggle is like you never had a plan or the diet after the diet, right? It's like the way that they kind of like explain it. So people usually gain the way back up because they never think past the actual goal. And that's a big problem, right? And I wrote a piece of content on this today. Like, okay, you lost the 20 pounds. Most people were regaining back up because they didn't understand exactly why they wanted to accomplish the 20-pound loss. And they get it. And they say like, I did it. Right. And then like 2 days later, like it doesn't really feel like the incredible. It's the same thing that happens with people that want to make money and be rich and famous or have millions of followers in their Instagram accounts, right? Like you feel that it's going to give you fulfillment and happiness, but the reality is that if you don't understand the purpose and the why behind those things, then it's not going to happen. And this is why actors and actresses in Hollywood are committing suicide and they're just massively depressed, many of them, right? Because of the fact that they think that that's what's going to help them be the happiest people on earth, but it's not. It's very shallow. So a lot of times the people that gain way back up is because they didn't really understand why they were doing it in the first place. And of course, the tactical stuff, which is whatever they did was very restrictive. So the typical thing that happens is many of these like diets and different things like that, they restrict calories incredibly low. So of course, people follow the program and they're like, I'm going to follow through this program. They cut their calories tremendously. Now they attribute their success to this program. No, it wasn't the program. It was the calorie restriction you created as a result of following these instructions, right? And the problem is that from the metabolic standpoint, your body gets adjusted to that depending on how long you did it, right? So you were eating 1,000 calories every single day, right? Through the juice cleanses or whatever it is that you were doing, right? So you did that for 3 weeks. Of course, you lost like 25 pounds in 3 weeks, something crazy like that, I'm sure, right? But then the moment that you realize I can't be eating 1,000 calories for the rest of my life because your friend invited you out to have a couple of drinks and the couple of drinks already kind of added 500 calories, which is for half of what you were supposed to be having. You're not even counting the food that you have for that day. So now that they turn into a 2,500 calorie. So your body goes like, whoa, Kenzie, what's going on here? For the past 3 weeks, you've been giving me 1,000 calories. So now we have all this amount. Let's just make sure that we kind of store it because there's like this thing called adaptive metabolism. Your body adjusts to a situation so it can survive. So that's why people regain the weight. And that's why it's such a common thing for them for that to be the case.
Yeah, and then the other thing that happens is if you're on this 1,000 calorie diet and you go out and you have those couple drinks and you say, "Oh, well, I'm already at 1,000 calories. I'm already at 1,500 calories. Oh, I might as well just go and eat whatever I want. I've already messed up the diet, so I'll start again tomorrow." So you go and you go eat 3,000 calories. And then you're like, okay, I'll start again tomorrow. And that gets you into that binge restrict pattern. And that's why often when you regain the weight, you regain even more than originally,
Yeah.
than what you had originally.
And just a solution for this, for people that are struggling with the weight regain, would be do it differently. Like that's what we kind of like offer in our program. It's like we're gonna teach you to do it differently. Now, the way that we're gonna teach you to do it, it's slow. It's not always exciting, although you will learn to love what you eat, right? But it requires patience, consistency, and effort, which is the things that typical the diet industry are telling you don't have to do, right? Like when you start to think about obviously a liposuction, like how much effort and sacrifice does it require? Probably that just like a week in which you're gonna be a little bit sore from it, right? So
Mhm.
when you're actually kind of given this like dream goal and then a week, obviously people will pay, 10, 20, 30, $40,000 for it, right? Because you have to kind of like, reduce that commitment. But the thing with that liposuction is you can lose it if you don't have the right habits, right? And I see that all the time. So instead of like doing it the fast way, take the long way, right? You didn't gain the weight like overnight, right? So don't expect to lose it overnight either. And if you do, don't expect obviously to keep it that long. So try to make sure that you do it in a way that is effective. Now we do have for advanced clients that have like, that understand more nutrition science and stuff like that, there's a concept that now is thrown around in like the nutrition world now called reverse dieting. Reverse dieting, it's not a specific diet. It's just more about the process of, if you were restricting your calories tremendously, because sometimes you can kind of go very low sometimes to get to a specific goal, you have to kind of reverse that process. And instead of going from 1,000 calories to 2,500 calories, you start to kind of slowly incorporate and increase your calories in a way that is kind of like a bit of a staircase, right? So it's like slowly, week by week, you're kind of climbing the stairs one by one. And that's a good way to kind of recover, I guess we can call that, your metabolism in a way that you're not gaining the weight back up. So that's something else that a lot of people sometimes like do. But again, I would suggest a coach to help you obviously go through that process so you don't do it alone.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you make about the patience, consistency, and effort. There's no diet program, there's no fad diet program that's advertising patience, consistency, and effort as the ingredients.
Yeah,
Um,
never.
and I think the other also is not seeing it as temporary. Like if you see your diet plan, your diet changes, your nutritional strategy as a temporary solution, then that your weight loss or any kind of progress that you make towards your goals is also going to be temporary.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's just looking at it from the perspective. I was like, yes, you can definitely like increase the amount of things you do towards a goal, but you have to always have a baseline that helps you obviously stay where you're at. And
Yeah.
then, and we can leave this for another episode, but I just did a training again, based on some of the guys from Precision Nutrition did this infographic on the cost of getting lean and what is like the benefits of being at the specific body fat percentage, but also what are the trade-offs? What are the sacrifices you had to make? And what's the lifestyle of that person look like? And you know, being at a less than 10% body fat for men or less than 15% body fat for women requires a lot of sacrifice. Yeah, there are just some genetic freaks out there that don't have to do anything for that. But for most people, it's difficult. It's difficult to be that way. So it's understanding also what is it, what are the sacrifices you'll be willing to put, and then what is your lifestyle, what do you want it to look like, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we have a couple struggles left. One of them was getting enough protein. That one, I think we could probably direct people to your Instagram because we've put out some content recently on that and what protein at different levels looks like. Not sure there's anything you want to add on that
Yeah,
topic
there's
here.
also a podcast that I recorded in response to Jillian Michaels' protein requirements, and I broke down a lot on how much protein you need to be getting. So you can kind of probably refer back to it. We can continue, and I can find out what episode it is, and I'll tell you guys in a minute.
Okay.
But yeah.
Um, and then I think another one that would be good to cover is someone who's not meeting their caloric needs on weekdays because they're busy or they're just, yeah, I guess busyness is probably the biggest issue.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think this one person who commented said that there's a lot of protein in her meals and she gets very full, but then goes over on weekends and eats more than she needs. But then over the course of the week, that evens out with the calories. So in your opinion, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a dangerous pattern to be in? Do you think it's okay as long as her weekly calories are where they should be?
So the answer is it's not a healthy pattern to follow. But if it works in terms of like if you're seeing the results by doing it that way, there's not a big problem. What's happening to this person though is, you know, she's doing more like volumetric food kind of choices. So meaning like a lot more foods that have less calories, so lots more wholesome things. And then the weekend comes and it's like going back to the hyper palatable conversation from earlier, you're having a lot more things that are just easier to overconsume. I showed a picture yesterday to what a 2,000 calories worth of McDonald's look like and 2,000 calories worth of like an actual balance like they look like. And you can have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, a couple of drinks, like a couple of alcoholic drinks, and a couple of snacks for the same amount that you can have a mac chicken, like the one that is fried, the large one, with a large thing of fries, a large Coke, and then one McFlurry. So that what I just described, literally just that one meal, which some people will do in one setting, has exactly the same amount of calories that a breakfast with like a yogurt parfait, with maybe some like, you know, a full blown like, you know, salmon dinner, and then maybe some chicken with some rice and a side salad for lunch, a couple like a glass of wine at nighttime, a cup of coffee, and a couple of snacks in between. Everything that I just said is exactly the same as that. So on the weekends, it's very likely that most people typically have one more time available. So more time available means like more voids. So more times that you want to fill in with stuff. And sometimes that's food. Number two, typically you are more exposed to social gatherings and social environments in which there's going to be more like processed foods and different things like that. It's easier to be able to kind of overconsume. Number three, you typically don't have a plan for the weekend. So you treat the weekends as kind of like a vacation, right? It's like, free for all, right? And then the week, it's like when everything kind of starts. And that's when most people typically kind of struggle with being able to actually accomplish results, particularly at that level when they're not necessarily super overweight. They don't have a higher amount of body fat, but they're obviously really trying. And these are the people that work out every Monday through Friday, and they're doing all the different things like that, right? But they're so frustrated because they can't see the results, even though they're checking all the boxes. You're not checking all the boxes. Like, the week has 7 days, not 5, right? So you have to really start to understand exactly what that looks like. Now, granted, some people can control that in a really good and effective way. It depends on the habits and the person. But I think that's a bigger problem that I tend to see very often in many people.
Mhm. Okay, and our last one, which I think we may also direct to another podcast episode, is consistency, which I think is something we talked about a lot because it's a huge issue. And it relates to the weekend thing. It relates to the weight regain thing. It's that consistency piece is really difficult for people.
Yeah, and we'll just kind of like touch on it briefly, which is, people struggle to be consistent because it's the long route for success, and not many people are willing to go through that route. And that's just like the reality. And a lot of times, consistency is created by repetition. And if you don't repeat certain things long enough, that you won't be able to be consistent with it. That's kind of like brushing your teeth. Like if you for the first time pick up a toothbrush and somebody told you like, oh yeah, you have to put this in your mouth, put some like toothpaste and then brush it because you had to clean your teeth. And like obviously when you were like a kid, right? You're like at the beginning, like, I mean, how many times your parents have to tell you like, go brush your teeth, go brush your teeth, go brush your teeth, right? Do you need to have somebody tell you that right now? No,
No,
because
no.
somebody repeated it so much and made you do it. And that's obviously what I do as a coach. Eat the thing, eat the thing, eat the thing. So I'm hoping that eventually things will become so natural that it's a habit that they built, right? So
Mhm.
so that's a problem that exists with consistency, that people don't really repeat things long enough for them to become habits. And because they don't become habits, they just simply become more of like a task that they have to do. You don't think, like, you don't really add into your into your like your list of things to do. You don't add brushing your teeth because it's natural. You always do it. And there's a ton of different habits, good and bad, that you currently have that you don't even have to write down because they kind of happen on a very natural like way, right? So
Mhm.
you are very consistent at those habits. You just don't see it that way. So eating breakfast every morning, hydrating, all the different things that you're required to do or that are important for health and wellness and to accomplish weight loss as well. Like, there are things that right now are tasks, but if you don't repeat them long enough, they won't ever become habits, and they will always be tasks. And you get tired of repeating certain tasks, especially when they don't run habits long enough. So I think that's a big thing with consistency, but it all gets connected to what you want to accomplish, why you want to accomplish it, and what you want your life to look like, in terms of that, and what are the trade-offs and the sacrifices you're willing to make throughout this specific time to be able to help you get to that point. That's a
Yeah.
big thing.
Mhm.
So, and just so you guys know, episode 106 has the one on protein, in case you want to go back to it and understand exactly how much protein you really need to have on a daily basis.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think that was a great way to finish off, summarizing a lot of things we talked about there. Um, yeah, are
Yeah.
there any final words you want to share to end
No,
our
I
episode for
think
today?
I think this is great. I think it's a good way for you guys to because I'm sure like some of the struggles that we share here today are exactly the same that I hear every single week, every single day, and they're very common.
Mhm.
So I think for you, listeners and people taking this, identify what the struggle was, and then try to implement the solution that we just kind of talked about in today's conversation. And I promise you that if you repeat it and you become consistent, so you can kind of hear that voice of me, like the brush your teeth thing, like, think of me like do the thing, and repeat it, eventually becomes easier. And when it becomes easier, then results happen and you don't even notice them, or you don't even notice when they did. That's obviously the point that we want to make sure that you get to. So with that, obviously, we finish out today's conversation. Thank you guys so much for listening, and to you, Kenzie, for being an awesome podcast sidekick. You did get a compliment from Roxy, who was like, Kenzie's so much natural. And I was like, yes, she is.
That's nice.
Yeah. So, but anyways, guys, thank you so much. Make sure you screenshot this right now and share it on our Instagram, on your Instagram or your social media channels, and tag us at Nibble to Nourish and Andres Ayesta on Instagram, so we can say hello. We can kind of like share. We can repost it and we can have a conversation. If you have any questions, guys, that's the best way that you can reach out to us, and you can get connected to us. If you guys are interested in figuring it out and dealing with some of the struggles through coaching and help, we would love to help you out with that. And you can find some details on the show notes in terms of how you can apply for a call with us, so we can see if we're a good fit to help you obviously solve some of those problems, and we have a solution for you to help you get to the next level in terms of your nutrition and your fitness goals. So once again, thank you. We'll see you guys next week.